Guess we'll get started. Looks like everybody's here. This session is automate your accessibility testing with Probo.CI. Basically going to be going over some ways to simplify. I know a lot of you probably are in the government space, and accessibility is kind of a requirement now based on the Section 508 compliance. So figured this would be a good session for you to show some tools you can use to automate some of this. It's not foolproof, but it'll give you at least an idea of how bad the situation may be. My name's Jason Moore. I'm a systems engineer at ZivTech. On pretty much any online platform you can find me as Skills. That's Drupal.org, Twitter, GitHub, anything online basically. The only thing I found out I'm not able to get one for one of the Facebook properties because I waited too long. But other than that, I work at ZivTech. We're based out of Philadelphia. We're pretty much a full stack development shop. We specialize in Drupal and web development, but we dabble in just about anything open source. And Probo was actually developed as an in-house tool originally, and we decided based on how well it worked for our team to try and open source it and allow others to contribute back to it and see how it works for them. So let's get down to business. Got a session overview here. What is Probo.CI? We're going to go over that. What is continuous collaboration, which is a concept that we've kind of coined the term based on what Probo does. How can you use Probo.CI to automate some of your accessibility testing? I used the abbreviation A11Y because it was too big for the slide. We're going to do some live Probo.CI dev examples, so things that you can do on your own projects to use Probo to leverage Probo in your workflow. And then at the end we'll have a Q&A for those who have some questions. I'll hopefully give some good answers. So what is Probo.CI? Probo is an open source continuous integration tool. It's also a software as a service platform for running tests. It's also a continuous collaboration tool for the whole team. I'll get more into that in a minute. Basically, time is money, and development bottlenecks can come in many different disguises to hurt your bottom line. We've identified several of these bottlenecks over our time developing at ZivTech, which ultimately ended up in Probo's initial development. We have code review, automated testing, visual regressions, merge conflicts, client review, change requests, and we rinse and repeat this process ad hominem. So how do we solve these problems? We include the stakeholders and those who mattered most in the project earlier in the review process. We accelerate the team feedback before code is merged. We make frequent and easy code deployments rather than overarching code deployments. Whoops. Uh-oh. Hit the wrong button. We complement automated testing tools. And we increase productivity by prioritizing quality work. Enter Probo.CI. Some of us may collaborate with team members on projects, but others may not. When I started at ZivTech, I was actually working for myself prior to that, so I wasn't really used to the benefits of collaborating on a larger team. I had worked with single developers here and there on specific projects, but never really in a larger scale environment with multiple developers or multiple teams. First of all, collaboration improves the quality of work. Second of all, it involves non-technical stakeholders in most cases, whether that be the product owner or a project manager or even a designer who's not really tech savvy. You want to be collaborating with these people along the process as you go. And the best part about it is it doesn't really require meetings. I don't know if anybody likes those, but I don't. It takes away from actually getting stuff done. So what is continuous collaboration, which is this term that I mentioned previously? We've kind of coined this term, I think. I don't know if it's used elsewhere. But the concept of it is that all members on a development project are working together on the project at a higher rate of interaction to gain feedback and complete the work faster with a higher quality. So developers are rarely blocked by bottlenecks in this process. We also see that the project managers can easily view the progress of the project from start to finish. And non-technical staff and stakeholders in the project can easily review the changes to provide valuable feedback earlier in the process. I'm not sure how many of you may have been on a project where everything goes well, and then we get to the point where the client wants to review it, and the process has already taken hours of the project's time, and it just comes back as we need to change it. This happens often. It's not your fault. It's just something that happens in this process, and it's something that you need to figure out how to deal with. And that's one of the reasons that we ended up coming up with Probo, was to deal with this process in a more streamlined way. So this particular slide, hopefully everybody can see that, is kind of a workflow diagram of how Probo's workflow goes. Typically we work, I'm not sure if anybody here is not familiar with Git, but the Probo system works out of Git. It also works with Mercurial through Bitbucket. But basically you work out of a pull request, feature request, feature branch kind of setup. A pull request is made. That pull request gets sent to a developer who creates the feature. That feature goes into a feature branch, which then gets created into a pull request on GitHub or Bitbucket. It's called a merge request on GitLab. That ends up going into the Probo system and creates what's called a build. And this build is essentially a Docker container that spins up an exact copy of your code with some other settings that you might be able to provide in a config file, along with a database and some other asset files that you may need to make your site really work for this kind of testing. And the best part about it is you end up getting a simple URL that spits out when the build is complete, that you can then push around to the people on your team, that need to see it. So that maybe that's a lead developer, or maybe that's the project manager, or maybe the client wants to see it. This can happen way before any sort of official demo goes into play or anything like that. And these changes can be reviewed quickly, and then if there is a problem, go right back to GitHub and make a comment or whatever on this problem. The sandbox that you've created, it lives on until you make another commit. Once you make that commit, that one kind of goes to sleep, so to speak, and your new commit now has a new container inside that pull request. So the changes have been made, the fix has been made. Now it goes back to your lead dev. They think everything's cool, so they'll pass that along. Oh, I keep bumping that. They pass that along to the project manager, and the project manager passes that same link along to the stakeholders on the project or the client. So once that's all done, said and done, the project lead reviews the code, merges it in, and you're on your way to deploying that, however your deployment process is, to production. So there's multiple ways to get started on Probo. Currently we provide an easy way to connect to GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab. We just launched the GitLab integration yesterday, so feel free to get in there and try it out. Basically, you do an OAuth through one of these systems to get access to your repositories, and then you can then go into the Probo site at the Probo app, and then enable some repositories, and then start pushing some builds up. So we also want to mention some other cool Drupal sandbox tools out there today. We have the platform.sh, which has a really nice even deployment sandbox tool, so you can test things all the way through to deployment. We have the Pantheon multi-dev environment, which actually works better with their build tools. You can actually integrate with Circle.CI and some other things where you could integrate a GitHub repository with their system, which also has workflows for deployment. Tugboat is another one of these tools that provides a preview of your site changes, so you can actually preview either a pull request or just a branch in theirs, which is kind of nice. And we're working towards getting towards a more open system where you can actually send branches and things like that. Currently, Probo is specifically built off of the pull request system, but we are looking at ways to expand that to allow branches. The other one is Open Dev Shop. I think John, I don't know if he's in here, but he's got a table out front of the one conference hall here up top, one of the balconies. He's got a really cool tool. It's more for localized development, but you can also set it up to be a production server where you can actually give yourself some sandboxes locally to develop in and then push through to production as well. You can also roll your own. That's kind of what we ended up doing when we started with Probo, was we rolled our own one of these. And originally, as I said, it started out as this tool because we ended up always creating a dev environment for these one-off demos that we had with clients that would take, maybe a half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, or it may take 2 hours to set up. But that's time off the clock, and that's money that should be in the bank. So, this type of a tool allows you to cut out a lot of that extra time to set up this environment, and as you're pushing your code, you have this environment already ready to go. So that leads me into, how do you develop without QA sandboxes? Testing environments may have a mix of changes that have not been vetted by your clients yet. You may have some lorem ipsum text on there, or you may have some funny node that somebody created that probably the client shouldn't see. Previewing a feature branch could take hours. Now that really depends on the complexity of the branch that you're reviewing, but it could happen. The way that we used Probo, we do our feature branches in a smaller chunk so that these changes are easier to review as we go. It's also one of the biggest problems is important test content gets lost before feedback from team members or clients is actually made. I don't know how many of you may have set up some sort of a staging site for a demo, or just on the dev site that you guys use as a team, and then somebody else comes in that morning and accidentally wipes the database and pulls down the fresh prod database, and there goes your demo content. Probo really solves this by giving you a full-on sandbox to upload your database to. The database will always be used for that sandbox, and you can continually make commits where that data that you have, the nodes or the blocks that you need to make this demo, are always there. So with QA sandboxes, we see that the testing environments have only work that's been approved by the client, and code is always ready to deploy. Reviewing is easy and not bottlenecked by other developers and other process bottlenecks that I mentioned previously. And test content needed for the review or for a demo is never getting wiped. You always have the copy of the database that you need. And the deployment steps have always been verified. Everything that we're doing is in code, so there's always a history to our commits. Even everything in your Probo config file is in your repository, so that's in code revision control as well. So everything is verified by other developers and reviewed. Now I have a lot of what this session is about is live examples and how Probo actually works. So I know these are always kind of a risky situation, but I've done it once and I'm going to do it again. Cross my fingers. So a lot of what the examples I have for today are practical examples that any developer could use to enhance their workflow or their team's workflow in both LAMP applications, Drupal, and we also have a WordPress plugin. So I'll be showing off ways that we can get connected through GitHub. We'll use some of the Probo plugins. We'll run some automated tests. We'll call out to some other APIs for testing. So we have like the backtrack.io as a visual regression test. Tenon.io is one that I'm going to show off a little bit more of because I think the people in this room would be a little bit more interested in that. And Netlify is one that you can actually test your deployment process, which is actually pretty nifty. And then we have a way that we can post Probo build notifications. So if your team's using Jira or Slack or HipChat, you can actually, as these builds complete, send off an API call to one of these APIs to post maybe a comment that gives you some information about, hey, this build's completed. Here's the link to check it out on Backtrack. Here's the link to check it out on, here's a link for the actual build itself. So we're simplifying these processes and making it easier for people to get to point A to point B in the development process in this tool. One of the main things you have to do here is you need to connect either a Git repository or a Mercurial repository. Mercurial is really only supported on Bitbucket right now that I know of, but Git is supported on all three. So I wanted to go through the process a little bit more of how we actually go about some of this. So I'm going to log out. Uh-oh, it lost me. Sorry about that. Okay. So we just added GitLab yesterday, so some people that are used to logging into Probo might be like, hey, what's that? This is new. We just set this up yesterday and deployed it. Probably our most popular product used is the GitHub integration. So I'm just going to log in with that. And what this does is it's basically OAuthing to my GitHub account. If it's your first time signing up or getting logged in, it'll actually ask you a couple questions. It'll make sure you want to approve the application on GitHub to make sure you want to approve the OAuth application. And then it'll actually ask you a few informational things about your account, so your name, your email address. And then you'll get to a screen that's kind of blank. It won't have all these projects. I'm going to go to the Probo Demos one. So I have a bunch of projects here that I've set up over time, just through these sessions that I've done and things like that, that give a whole bunch of examples of these kind of connections. I'm having a problem here because I'm like not seeing what I'm seeing here, but I will try to deal with this. Where'd it go? Okay. Now I really lost it. All right, well, we're going to do that instead, whatever. So I have a bunch of examples here that I'm going to try and go back and forth for here. So this is a Drupal thing, so we'll go into some Drupal examples first. So here I just have a basic Git repository for a Drupal 7 site. I'm running this out of a subdirectory called doc-root. And these are all things that you can define depending on how your structure of your repository is set up. You can actually change the directory that your doc-root subdirectory of your site is in. This just gives you a little bit more control over other files outside of your web root. So I like doing this. Basically over here we have, I have a bunch of pull requests against this particular one. This is my original one. So basically to get Probo set up, we have a .probo.yaml file, and this file is just a simple YAML file with configuration options that Probo enables for you. Basically the main one we need here is the steps command. Underneath that we can define a bunch of various steps. We can include the Drupal plugin here. So let me blow that up a little bit. So for this particular example, I'm using the Drupal plugin. And in the Drupal plugin, we have a handful of settings that you can configure specific to Drupal. So you can run, and so this one's running an install, so you can actually just use a bare bones Drupal 7 code base and actually perform an install through Drush with this plugin. So if you're somebody that does a lot of core development or something like that, this might be a tool that would be useful. And you can define what profile you're using. So if you're using an internal profile for your development, you can specifically call that. Here's the subdirectory that I was talking about. So we've got doc-root set for that, which just tells it where to look for the actual site files. And then down here, I'm actually running a different plugin that we have, which is a script plugin. This plugin allows you to basically run any bash commands that you want. So for this particular one, I'm running a curl command that's actually going to post some information about our build to our Jira, or to our Slack room. So I have a Slack notification being sent out anytime I push a commit to this pull request. And that's all happening through this config file. The .env asset that I have here is actually contains the API key for the Slack API. So that's something that I would suggest if you have, if you're worried about security, you can go ahead and add this asset file, which if I go back over to the app, so if I was to go over, this is the project on Probo that I was looking at in GitHub. I've made a few pull requests against this for different demos and tests, but the build assets is where this .env file lives. And these assets could include your database file. As we're using here, we have like an environment file. There could be other files, some sort of text file that you need, or something that you need to generate on the fly that you don't want to include in your repository. You can then add to these assets, and then in the settings here, you just call the assets setting and then tell it what assets you want to call. So if you wanted to use a database here, you'd upload a database to the assets, and then you just call the asset here. And then actually one of the settings that you can call in the Drupal plugin is your database name, or the database file, that is. And I'll show that in another example here in a few minutes. But this is a very simple version of a Probo config file. There are many more. You could layer a ton of steps on here. We have some customers that their builds take 2 hours to run because they're running Behat tests across every URL on the site. So it can be extended to be very large set of tests, or it could just be something as simple as installing a Drupal 7 site like this is, just to do a demo. I'm gonna hop over. Actually, let me just do a quick change here. So, because whoops. That should be fun. All right. I don't like that I did this with the screen. So this is the actual settings I have here for this one. I'm just going to go in and make a simple change in the YAML file real quick. And this is not anything to write home about, but it's a simple change. And what it's going to do is it's going to kick off a new build for us on Probo. So anytime you have a new commit against one of these builds, you're going to kick off a brand new build in Probo. And you can see that it's kind of active right now. So the little yellow circle here is showing that the build is actually happening. And on the pull request itself, you'll actually get back the steps that you've entered into your Probo YAML file. So you actually see what's running as it's running. Sometimes the API doesn't update these like in the mix, so you might have to refresh. I don't know if that's the WebSockets on GitHub being a problem or what. But basically, each one of these links, the details links you back to this particular step in the Probo app. So if I wanted to see like, hey, this is holding up at the Drupal site install step, I can click over and see what's actually happening in that step. So currently it's running the install process of the site. And once this finishes, so it's finally finished that step, and this posts over to our Slack channel. Let me hop in there. And after you finish the build, you get a link over here to view the site. Ta-da! Okay, so that actually just happened completely from scratch. The previous build that we had is actually still there. If we toggle show all builds here, we can actually open this up and see all the other builds that we've ever done against this PR. So I can go back and look at this one or rebuild it if I want to find out like, hey, why did this change? We need to look at that again. So any one of your previous builds are there. What you end up with is a URL that this particular URL changes per commit, whereas this, there's a, where'd it go? This view build permalink, we actually have some environment variables on our docs site. In the build configuration section over here, there's an environment variables page that gives the environment variables we have. What I'm using is the build domain to actually provide programmatically the URL that's being spit out when I go over to Slack here. Oh, I gotta jump over to this one. Okay. this one? Ah, okay. So let me pull that over here. Did it? Oh. Okay. Sorry, the screen thing is really getting me. So here's the notification that was sent from the commit I just made in our Slack chat. So it's saying that here's the pull request we had, is being tested now, view the build here. So the build URL, the build domain variable generates as you're generating the build. So you won't really know it until the build completes. So the variable allows you to pass it along to something like this, like a notification or something, kind of prior to knowing that it's actually done. So that's a very helpful way to do it. So that was just a quick look at the Drupal plugin. I did want to show the Drupal 8 one as well. Not much of a difference here. You can see I have a few more files. This one I think I started it with the Drupal Composer project. So this is essentially a copy of that. And then I have a pull request I've made over here. And in this particular one, let me blow that up again. Okay. This particular one, we're actually using a different image. So one of the things that we have are different images that you can call depending on your version of Ubuntu. We currently have Ubuntu 14.04 and 16.04 images. I'm going to be working on some 18.04 ones soon. But right now, most people still use the 14.04 ones actually. But we support 5.6 through 7.2 of PHP in these images. And the idea is to try and allow you to use an image that kind of mimics your production environment the best, closest possible. In this one, I'm using another EMV file. I think in this one, I'm actually posting. No, this one goes to Slack as well. This particular one, the steps have a few more steps here because we want to update Composer. We want to make sure that we're using the right Drush version. And then we're going to do a Composer install to make sure we have all of our packages and dependencies prior to doing the Drupal site install. On this particular one, this is also just doing a standard install process. We're not using a DB for this one. But if you wanted to, you could upload a database asset and just do a MySQL dump. And it can be in an ungzipped or gzipped format that you can add that as an asset. And then you can have a copy of your dev site inside this container. And on this one, I was doing some checks to make sure what version of PHP we had. So here's just a simple command. We have two versions of the script plugin, so to speak. One is actually allows you to run multiple commands as either this piped, the way that you can run it as like a YAML with pipes, or you can do each line separately with the dash YAML, like these, like the regular config settings. So this one right here will do the same thing. If we go back over to the, oops, yeah, at least this one I only have one. So if I want to edit this, we'll do something fun and we'll use a different image.
You're asking for trouble now.
I know, I'm pushing the limits of live feeds. Okay, so I'm going to commit to this branch. That's going to go ahead and kick off. Get my thing. That's going to go ahead and kick off our pull request. And again, you can see the steps that we've got going here. This one's got a few more steps, I think. So we'll see a few more of the steps here. But ultimately, each one gets printed for you here. And you can click through to check any of them out if something's going on.
You got Travis on that too?
I do, but this particular one's going to fail because I have something wrong in my Travis YAML. But you can definitely integrate the two together, yeah. I was actually using this as like I just kind of copied what they had in like the core one, so I think it's probably something that shouldn't probably be in my project. But it was, I was just trying to see if I could get that integration working real quick. We actually have some integrations that we do with Pantheon where we use their build tools, and we end up using either Terminus or what is it, the Circle.CI integration that they have to then, and we use GitHub because we haven't yet fully integrated with Pantheon, like their repository system, but you can still use GitHub with their build tools to do the same process, essentially. So this one should be done now. And on this one, I was also checking a bunch of versions of stuff. So you can see that my PHP version updated to 7.2. And if we go to our site, it should still be in working condition. Now, let me see something here. So the Travis is still running. It's probably going to fail. I tried getting to work at the end of the day yesterday, but I figured that I would rather have the Probo side working. So it does work if you get it configured properly. What I was trying to get going here just isn't right. So let me see where I'm at over here. Right, so the build process is the same pretty much across GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab. We do also, if you get a silver plan or higher, we also can integrate with Bitbucket Server, which used to be called Stash, if anybody's familiar with that. Trying to see where I am on time. Not much. All right. We saw some of these plugins in play. We do have a WordPress plugin if anybody does WordPress. I know that's not like a big word to say around here, but the plugin works pretty good. They actually have their own CLI tool that they based off of Drush, WP.CLI, that works pretty much the same way as Drush. So one of the things I wanted to show before the end of all this is the automated accessibility testing tools that that I've come up with and tested. So beyond that, there's also you can call out to pretty much any other testing API out there. We got Backtrack. I've got tests for that. Travis, like you saw. Circle.ci can get involved as well if you're using the Pantheon dev tools. And Netlify, which is something that we just started messing with in the last couple of months, actually allows you to test deployment processes, which is neat. So I'm going to hop back over and show you some of these other examples, if I can find my browser. All right. All right, so I did most of these off of the Drupal 7 project that I have here. I'm going to mirror my thing because I just cannot do this. I apologize. The screen got weird on me. right, so at least everybody can see. All right, so I tried getting one working with Lighthouse and was unsuccessful due to the Chrome version. So that one I need to do a little bit more work on. But I did get there are two one second. Oh, okay. So the first one I got is the tenon.io. I don't know, is anybody familiar with this tool? You should be. It is automated accessibility testing. You basically give it a URL and it will run umpteen checks against the URL. So on this particular one, I'm using our Drupal 7, basically the same project I was using earlier, but in this particular one, I have an additional script step down here, the tenon.io test. And really all you need to do is post this curl command. Don't look at my API key. But this was done just as a quick example, but you would want to put that in an env file up here. But essentially this particular command runs a curl command against the API, and I've included the build domain here, so it automatically knows what the URL of this build is going to be. So when we kick this off, I'll go ahead and just kick off a new one. I gotta go over here. So I'll kick off a new build here just to get this going. And I actually signed up for a brand new Tenon account. So based off of this, can I submit it? Oh, well, seems my demo is a little out of date. One of the things I did a few weeks ago was we changed the file names on our images. So this particular one must have a wrong one, yeah. I'm just going to get rid of it. If you get rid of the image altogether, and it'll just use our default image, which is PHP or Ubuntu 14.04 with PHP 5.6. So this build's going to kick off. You can see our steps starting here. And so when it gets to the Tenon step, over here, we should see the actual tests kick off on over here. Now I'm no pro at this Tenon setup yet, but it gives you a lot of options in here to set which what types of things you want to check for. So it's got like the WCAG 2.0, 1.0, and some other specifics for HTML5 for ARIA and stuff. So I mean, it has a very large set of tests that you can run against the site. So I think, you know, you can also run it directly through this API or through this UI here. You could just give it a URL. But with Probo, you can actually add this in as a step and have this be part of your workflow. So you could not only just have it be every time you send up a commit to this PR, kick off this test, but you can also have it send a URL to your team and say, hey, this is the Tenon URL. You can post it up to Jira, you can post it to Slack, HipChat, whatever you're using, and it just takes that extra manual human step out and adds to that, you know, to your workflow, allowing you to just keep doing your work. So let's see where we're at on this. Ooh. Uh-oh. Oh, well, I needed that, apparently. Whoops. The version of Drupal now requires PHP 7.1, apparently. So let me go. So on our doc site, we have this Docker images page, which actually defines all the images that you can use. So out of the box, we're using the 140456. So I'm just going to go grab the 7.1 image and place that back into this setup. So just image, colon, name of the image. You can only use whitelisted images. We have just those images, so you can't just go out to the Docker Hub and run any image USA. You need to run one of our whitelisted ones. We will be, we're in the process of trying to look at possibly for certain packages, plans, being able to use custom images. But we're still trying to figure out the best way to vet those images and make sure they're secure and things like that. But the idea is already there. So now that we have the right version here, we should actually be getting our steps instead of just a fail. So we're already halfway through. I guess it would have been nice to actually put the Slack message or something in this one too to show it, but ultimately the idea is that you can have these tools kick off and then either send a URL dynamically in another step or just have somebody click through on the pull request and get to the tests that you've done. While that one's running, okay, so now it's kicking off the 10-on test. So it should start to get results here. Yeah. So now we're getting results. And this is the interface. It could be a little overwhelming to begin with, but it definitely gives you a wide range of things to take a look at. I know that the government space is very specific to the Section 508 stuff, the compliance that you need. But this gives you at least an idea of where you need to look instead of having to do it all manually, which is really bad. So that's an API call. We also have, I also found another one, well, you may be familiar with this, but I didn't know they had an API, the Wave WebAIM tool. They have a similar type of API that you can send requests to. Same kind of idea, you send a curl command. This one I had to actually add some more code in just to get it to spit out the XML report. So this one I have it build in the report that actually will format it as XML, and then it's this type 3 report which actually gives a little bit more info about like the actual XPath of where the problem is. So if we were to take a look at this over in the Probo side, I actually have, the test is already done on this one. I'm just want to check the file name. So yeah, I'm spinning it out at WebAIM report.xml. So same idea here, you can check your logs. With this one, because of the way I ran the report, it basically just gave me the response from the curl command, which isn't really the test that we want to do. But if we go over to our test site, I now have this XML report that you can hand off to somebody on your team, ingest it maybe in some smarter way that's a little bit less mechanical, but it gives you that overview of what's going on. I do want to hit this other tool real quick. So those were APIs that we can call out to. Another one is this A-checker API. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. I basically just went around and tried to find as many of these as I could to show. This one's the same kind of deal, where it actually runs this command. You give it the actual types of checks you want to do. So this one's doing WCAG2-AA, which is like a specific type of report. A lot of these you just go to the URL and it just gives you the report. So I'm actually kind of faking it out by doing the curl command and then downloading the report, and then putting it in a location on the site. So this report in the actual Probo log, we'll say, over here, I actually, instead of going and pushing it to Slack or something like that, I just gave the URL here. So this report is available here. So if we go over here, this report should come up. It's nothing to look at, but it does give you the information you need to start making these changes. The nicest one I found, outside of the Tenon IO, which it's not free, it's a service that you have to pay for, but if this is something that you have to do on a daily basis, it's well worth it. The one that I found some localized testing tools that you can just load up in the container and run them. This particular one I liked the most, even outside of Tenon, because you can use this one for free. So this one's called the A11 machine. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's an NPM package that you can load up on, your machine or your server. And what I'm doing here is I'm installing with the script plugin, I'm installing the package. This most likely will become a tool that we add out of the box soon. In one of our next build updates or image updates, I'll probably be adding this in. But you basically run this command. I'm running it against the build domain again, because this is always for this particular domain, or this build. Then I have the standards that I'm implementing that I want to test for. And then I have an output directory. Because of the way this particular repository is set up, I have the root or the doc roots outside of the main root. So the way that this script runs, if I ran this command, it's going to put it at /source, which is actually where our site files live. So I'm copying this to an output directory, var www.html a11m output, which is essentially where it would put it if you didn't put this, if you didn't have a doc root like subdirectory. So I had to define this just so it went in the right subdirectory of the live site, or of the site. So then if I come back over here and I'm going to check the details on this, I did the same thing at the end of this one and just put the display URL. So I have down here where this report lives. And this one is really slick because it gives you a full HTML report that is essentially lives inside your container here. That gives you the problem areas. Click through, you can go to the actual build URL and see where your problem lies. It's got this fancy graph. I thought this one was the coolest tool, just based off of the ones I tested outside the Tenon one. The Tenon one is definitely more of a robust report and has, I'd say, like a lot of support behind it, and like monetary support because it's a company. But this project's really neat, so I would definitely check that out. So just gonna finish up here. So I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. If anybody has questions, I can try to answer them. None? Not a single one. Oh, okay.
You were running Travis at the same time. I was just wondering, is there something that Probo doesn't do that Travis does? Or
you can use both.
Why, though? I mean, is there something that Travis does that Probo doesn't?
The difference, I mean, there's, when you're loading Travis up, you can do a lot of the things you can do on Probo, but you're not going to have some of the built-in functionality that we have. So like the Drupal plugin or the WordPress plugin, we have built this a lot around Drupal development. So a lot of it has Drupal specifics to it that because we're a Drupal shop, we want to have these tools that I don't think you get out of the box with something like Circle or one of those. But I mean, it's probably something that you could tool into your Circle setup.
Would it be possible to run your build and test steps asynchronously from each other, or do they have to happen in a linear format? Like, for example, could I run my Behat test suite concurrently with my accessibility test suite?
You're talking like matrix builds? We have that in our roadmap. If you go to the Probo.CL site, we have a roadmap page that has like all the stuff that we have currently in development and coming up, and that's on the list of things that we want to do, of being able to have concurrent builds running at the same time on the same PR. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Here you can find where to register for Probo. We have our Probo.CL site, and anybody can contribute. The Probo project itself is open source, and a lot of the different tools and plugins we have are open source. One of the guys, Mike Bagnell, is actually here. He actually wrote the whole Probo open source project and the documentation. So if you're interested in that, try to find Mike. I think he was at the first booth on the far side. And thank you, everybody.